1395, Adelaide's FIVEaa. This is Richard Pascoe.
Yes, back with you for the last hour of the show. It is now 3 o'clock here on 5AA. Getting a few people sending me messages at the moment. Caller rang just to let us know that any of your children on your Medicare card, they will appear on your MyGov account. The point that I'm probably trying to make is that it needs to appear on their smartphone, you know, for some way, or you can make a PDF on there as well. I don't think it's still a clear-cut way for this to occur. My next guest is what you'll describe as a medical expert who's got some tremendous stories. No pressure at all there, Travis. From about, you know, he puts his heart and soul into telling medical stories. Has got a podcast which we will give an enormous plug to as well. But, you know, he gives information about going deeper into specific diseases and conditions with history and science. Good afternoon, Travis, and welcome to 5AA.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I was talking to somebody about you, and they mentioned Pap Smears.
Yes.
As well. Can you give me some of the history behind that?
Yeah, so it's quite an amazing history, this one. This one goes back quite about around 100 years. We have two people in particular. There's George and Mary Papanicolaou. So if that name sounds a bit familiar, it's because the Pap Smear is named after George and Mary Papanicolaou. So the amazing thing about this is George was a scientist, and he was studying, pretty much the cervical cancer. Now, he had a bit of trouble, at this time getting human, pretty much subjects to do it on. So his studies was on, I think it was hamsters or guinea pigs, just trying to remember. And so he was getting Pap smears from, it is guinea pigs, yeah. And so what he was doing study, and he was trying to convince the medical fraternity at the time that he could actually detect cervical cancer well before you get any, symptoms. And so it wasn't groundbreaking at the time. It wasn't shown that, because effectively people were saying, well, when the cancer comes along, you just manage it how it is. Screening wasn't an important role at that point in time. Eventually what happened was through interesting maneuvers, or, no one took much notice of it, but his wife, Mary, turns out to be a remarkable woman who actually had then volunteered for George to do a Pap smear. And as far as we know, she seemed to volunteer to have a Pap smear every day for 20 years. And he would actually take the Pap smear and look at it under the microscope. And
it's 20 years.
Every day for 20 years. And so our understanding from that is that George could tell that just the different cycles, a woman would go through. You could actually see hormonal changes. And we know that to this day, the hormonal changes. And so his theory was, well, maybe if some people have cancer in these areas, maybe I will be able to detect them early. And so he did end up getting women who had cervical cancer and got Pap smears from them and said, yes, I can actually detect changes early. And what happened from there was one step led to another. He ended up convincing the, doctors that not only could you detect cancer, but you could detect it far before it manifests as a disease with symptoms in a patient. And so he had this massive study and ended up revolutionizing the way we look for, screening cancer. But it took him, decades to convince everyone around him. And so you've got this combination of George, who has the amazing scientific, insight, but you also have Mary, who was clearly, her contribution has saved, millions of lives. And so it's an amazing story. So, yes, it was, this is one of the Pap smear, which, is changing a little bit these days. So it was a 2-year test. Now it's a 1 in 5 year test. And so, yes, but this stems from this story.
I mean, 20 years, I mean, for blokes out there, can you imagine getting a prostate done every day for the 20 years?
I imagine we'd still be struggling identifying anything for it. Again, it shows the remarkable volunteer or the remarkable, selflessness for her to do that. First of all, for George for his study, and then the implication for everyone that it turned out such a remarkable discovery.
It's a wonderful discovery as well. Trey, have you got any prostate? Because we did talk about that before. Have you got a prostate story for me, Travis?
Yes, there was a prostate episode we did. This was what we have is a gentleman. He was a scientist. I'm just trying to remember his name now. He was a scientist, actually. He was a urology scientist about 100 years ago. What he ended up, he's Dr. Charles Huggins, and he was a urologist, over about 100 years ago. And what he happened to do was he wanted to study the prostatic secretions. And so, this was 100 years ago. So how do you get prostatic secretions? Well, again, you don't have too many, volunteers at that point in time. So the animal he chose, which was remarkable when you look at it, was dogs. And so he then did a procedure on a dog to get secretions from it. He operated. He put a tube into the prostate and was able to, when the dog woke up, he was able to get pure secretions from the prostate from the dog. And what he was planning to do was a metabolism experiment on the secretions. But he had this very interesting dilemma, because what happened was the dog that he chose, he found prostatic cancer cells in there.
Wow.
And he was, what do you do with these cells? And what he ended up doing. Now, it should be noted that dogs are one of the few animals that actually gets prostate cancer. So it's just a remarkable coincidence. And what he ended up doing, well, I can't do this study because then it's a confounding factor that you'll have cancer cells and it might interfere with my metabolism exercises or experiments. And so what he did then was he thought, okay, well, what happens if we pretty much, what they say, castrate the dog, so they neuter it, so remove testes. And what he found was when he desexed the dog, what we would call today, the cancer cells disappeared. Now, this was revolutionary at the time because you thought cancer was unregulated proliferation of cells, as we think of these today. But what he showed was that if you remove, pretty much what it was is removing testosterone from the dog, you could actually control the cancer. And so this is now what they found. He ended up getting a Nobel Prize for this because it shows that cancer not necessarily is completely unregulated. And if you take some of the hormonal cancers away, the hormonal regulators away, you could actually control cancer. So this is now part of, therapy. And we know we can regulate cancers in this way, such as prostate cancer. So you can actually do chemical castration. So you can interfere with testosterone, which will control prostate cancer. There are things like breast cancer, which is hormonally regulated. So when we're giving therapy for that. So this was just a coincidence that he found that, prostate cancer does respond to hormones if you take them away, and you could actually manage it. So yeah, it's a remarkable story, that one. It's two incredible stories. Apologies if you're eating afternoon tea at the moment. That's what I'm going to say at the moment as well, because you might be feeling a bit queasy on there as well. Travis, so another story that stems back in time, because I love those sort of stories. Yeah. So, well, look, there's one one that always surprises me. This was actually I'm not sure if some of your listeners may know. It's actually called the Women of Radium Girls. This stems back to World War One, where it had been a recent development where Marie Curie had identified radium. And what had happened was this radiation, effectively. So the problem is with a discovery, and particularly a new discovery, is that you often don't know the dangers of what you're working with, and that's certainly true for Marie Curie with radiation. And we even know to this day, her notebook when she was developing radium or sort of, using it, her notebook that she used for that is radioactive, and it will be for the next, I think it's 1,500 years. And she ended up dying of, aplastic anemia, just because the radiation pretty much killed her bone marrow. But when radium was being used, what they found was in World War One, you could use radium to paint, use it as a luminescence, something that didn't need light for it to identify, to see. So at nighttime, it would just glow and you could use it. And what was happening was they thought, well, in World War One, what we can do is paint it on dials of clocks. Now, these women were employed in the United States to paint these clocks with radium. Now, this is just like any paint or, luminescence. And the problem was, they were painting, and it was called what they did lip dip tip, or tip lip dip, one of the way around. And what they would do is dip their brush in the paint. They would paint it and then touch it to their lip and then proceed, because you want these little fine strokes of the clock dials to light up. Unfortunately, for the women who were employed to do this, they clearly were to the point of working an 8-hour shift. They literally said they glowed. And this was from all the radiation that they were working with and they were putting into their mouths. And these women became incredibly sick. They very unwell. Most died. They ended up, unfortunately, suing. And what ended up happening was in the legal system, they ended up winning the case, but I think none of them saw the end of the case.
No. And
it changed their health and safety. I mean, the irony of all of this is, they realized how dangerous radium was and radiation was because of these women, and the scientists who then ended up developing the atomic bomb realized that they should take all these precautions. And so it's just such this amazing stories that come out when you start digging into medicine as to what we know today is a lot from, trial experiments, sometimes luck, and just sometimes just very unfortunate events.
I just got a text message in. People love the Pap test story as well, which is great. Travis, given what we see going on today, have you got any thoughts about COVID-19?
Yeah, look, I'm dealing with COVID-19, and just in my day-to-day work. Look, it's amazing to see, and I'll be honest, in the last probably 50 or so years, there have been a few pandemics, but it's interesting. This is sort of the first global pandemic most of us will have pretty much lived through. It's unusual to say that, but through history, pandemics are actually being quite common. And, there's everything from, the Black Plague and where we go. And that was, in the 1300s. When we look at the Black Plague, this was, devastating disease. And anywhere from 10% to 30% of the population actually died, as best estimates that we have at that point in time. So we're looking at populations of, between, less than 1% mortality rate. And we're really struggling to cope with that. And so it's interesting to see that, how we're struggling with that. The vaccine debate is interesting. From a medical perspective, it's like, you're trying to balance making sure you're looking after as many people as possible. So it is a bit of a challenge living through it. I think. I mean, the main thing goes out. It's remarkable. It's easy to look at the really small segment of the population that are very vocal about their anti sort of vaccination or their beliefs, but then you realise there's a real significant, percentage of the population who are all doing the right thing, who are isolating when they're unwell, who are getting tested, and then if they are positive, they're staying away. And so that's probably a heartening, if not a little bit less of a advertised, thing that's happening through COVID. So it's sort of hard to manage. But yeah, this is it's an amazing time to live through. I'm hopeful that we'll get past it and think about sort of the future and what we've learned from it.
I think we're all hopeful we will get past it. Travis, you've got a podcast, haven't you?
Yes.
Yes. So give the plug out, Travis. That's what it's all about.
Okay, so we've got two. One's called This Pathological Life. So the stories you heard there about the Pap Smear and prostate, they feature early in the series. So there's around 45 episodes. And I often, there's everything from HIV all the way through to, again, prostate cancer and mesothelioma. And I mean, the premise of the podcast is, what did we know back then? So you would have even fun things like, let's do the, historical autopsy of Alexander the Great or Napoleon, just to say, what did they know then and what do we know about that now? And so that's, any podcast or Spotify, you can find it on there. We've started a new series, and this is called This Medical Life. And again, same deal. It's on all Spotify and podcast service. This is where we're trying to broaden. So I'm a pathologist. So pathology is still the fundamental basis, but I'm branching a little bit further. So this one, we've done 7 series, so 7 episodes so far. We're just about to drop one, such as, the historical autopsy of Henry VIII and, his, quote, exploding coffin, end quote. And we've got in this one, we do things like lupus and multiple sclerosis, but also things like syphilis, and looking at the history behind the disease when we first knew about them, just like the stories I've told, moving into then the, probably sort of things like Parkinson's or, mad cow disease. And so that's my hope. I'm hoping we've gotten positive feedback and people seem to enjoy it. The aim is for things like medical students, general practitioners, because it's also a time for us to say, this is what we know about it. Here's what you should think about as a general practitioner. But we know that we have a lot broader listener base than that.
Which you would. Travis, you've just put me onto another subject now. I've heard there's a syphilis outbreak in Adelaide. It's rife or something, isn't it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it feels like when you hear the term syphilis, it feels like a biblical and ancient disease. It does. But yeah, look, and the problem that we have is because we treat things so well. Syphilis being one. Often people don't think of it as it's a disease. I'll just go and get a shot. And it's like it still can cause problems. But yes, syphilis prevalence is increasing. We're just trying to encourage people, the high risk people, particularly men who have sex with men, to protect themselves and their partners. But it also can cross over into other sexual categories, and so what we're trying to encourage people is don't forget safe sex. And yes, unfortunately, even as we're going through COVID, you still have to remind people, other diseases are still relevant, but still important to go get checked, go get tested, still be protective of yourself. And so that's what, yes, we're trying to, if we can encourage people just to keep up protection and everything that will help them with their own health.
Very good. So, This Medical Life, is that correct?
That's right. So this Pathological Life and now This Medical Life, these are podcasts freely available for anyone to listen to.
Do yourself a favour, people are getting lots of reaction on the text line. Somebody just comes through and said, yuck. on there as well. So that happens, people. But who would have thought on afternoons you would have heard about Pap Smears, prostate and syphilis coming out of my mouth as well.
Well, yes, it is one of those amazing things to think about, but it's sometimes my co-host Steve Davis is a seasoned radio announcer. Yes, sometimes we put him off his tea, but he comes through it, and he's still eating, so he's doing well.
He won't give up eating. I've actually got Steve on tomorrow, so as well. Travis, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for talking to me on 5AA today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. There you go, folks. Who would ever have thought that these subjects would come in a segment that I've done on 5AA? We're going to go to a short break and we'll be right back with your calls.